improvement in the plan. Dr. Sockwell and Ms. Ferrer will have an opportunity to go through that information with you today, so hopefully they'll answer your questions. I also want to point out that we posted today a crosswalk that we've created that highlights some similarities with the strategic plan metrics that we've discussed as staff and as a board at our work sessions and retreats, that aligns what we've delineated for metrics along with the operational expectations, and we've also added that alignment with our student achievement goals. And so you can see where the direct connections are, and we've also listed what those residual goals are along with those residual operational expectations that aren't noted in the plan. We're giving this to the board and to the community, but most importantly for you, to think about before we have our June 8th work session, where we start to finalize the work in the plan. And I believe, Dr. Garza, that's a 4-hour work session for that particular day.
That day is almost completely dedicated to the work around the strategic plan. I don't know that we've been protecting that time, so I don't think there's anything else currently scheduled on that day. So we're trying to keep that a good bit of time, whether it be 4 hours, maybe a little longer. It'll be all around work on the strategic plan.
So you'll have an opportunity between now and then to think about the metrics, to think about the direction of the plan, but to use this as a primer before we actually have that meeting. And after the presentation today, I'll then give you an update as to where we are with the strategic plan, the timeline, because some of our discussion may have an impact on our timeline. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sockwell and Ms. Ferrer.
Okay. Do we have the PowerPoint up? Good. Good morning. Our purpose today is to provide the school board with feedback on a set of focus groups that we conducted related to the strategic plan actions. We spoke with a variety of folks to get feedback for you, and these included employees, and by employees we included teachers or non-administrative school-based staff. We also included principals, assistant principals, and central office staff. So those folks represented separate focus groups. In addition, we went to the community and talked with community members and parents to gather the feedback. So how were these folks selected? What did we do to select these folks? One, we emailed communications to a sample of stakeholders in each one of these groups. As you can imagine, there were literally thousands of people in each category. And so we emailed communications first to find out if people were interested and available. We had some dates that we suggested to them, and so we got that kind of information. When we communicated with the community, we communicated in all 7 major languages, or we gave them an opportunity to respond to us such that we could give them additional information in their native language. So once we determined who was interested and available, we did some random sampling of participants, and that was our plan. But in cases where the number of interested folks were less than we were going to sample, we just took anybody who was interested in participating. So who actually attended these sessions? This chart shows for the various groups the number that attended. For instance, community and parents, there were 96 folks. These folks were divided into 5 different regions, so we tried to represent each region. Our intended goal was to at least have 20 participants per region in the focus groups, and so we came pretty close to this with the 96. And then you can look across and see the numbers of staff who also participated in the focus groups. And underneath, in the last row, you see the number of sessions that we had for each one of those groups. So what did we ask these folks to do? When we first brought each group together, we gave them some background information on the current efforts towards developing a strategic plan. We also provided them time to review the strategic actions, because As a matter of fact, not all groups were able to get the information in advance, and so we built in a time for them to review before we actually engaged them in the process, whether they got it in advance or not. And then we use a variety of processes to make folks comfortable and to engage them in the conversations. But what do we ask folks for during the focus groups? Each focus group was designed around, you see, for employees, 4 questions. We asked if they thought these actions as a set were sufficiently comprehensive. And then the issue was on impact. What was the impact on their individual work? What was the impact on their team or their office? And then ultimately, what's the impact on your school or department? So we had different interests because we anticipated different concerns for different stakeholder groups. With the community and parents, we asked first for these folks to reflect whether or not this set of strategies actually captured the community values that they had expressed through the ECRA process last year. And then we asked similar questions as with the employees. Are they sufficiently comprehensive? Are they innovative and forward-thinking? And by that, when we were asked what we meant by that, do we think we're doing something different enough to land in a different place, is how we explain that to folks. And then lastly, was it worth the investment of the time and resources, this set of actions? When we brought folks in, or in advance, we had already assigned each person to a specific goal area. Of course, there were the 4 goal areas: student success, caring culture, premier workforce, and resource stewardship. So you came in having prepared your reactions to a specific area, but we designed the process so that before the hour and a half was up, you got a chance to comment on all of those areas across any of the questions that you wanted to respond to. So you were not confined to a single area. So what were some of the general findings? These are the observations of the office that came from the presentation itself. Are we having some technical difficulties?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Our clicker isn't working as well as we want it to.
Okay. So 1, responses to the focus group questions. As I showed you, we had some very specific questions that we asked folks about. When we got our responses, however, it was clear that people were responding, across all groups, they were responding in ways that were not necessarily related to or confined to the questions themselves. In other words, when people came in, we asked them questions and they told us whatever they wanted to tell us. And that's what we captured, and that's what we presented. The other issue was perceived role, and Mr. Smith hinted at this. Although our questions were stated pretty neutrally, we did give them a context of why we were doing this in the first place. We were doing this to provide some information that could be helpful in improving the actions or deciding not to do these actions. So people assumed the role of, how can we help you make these action statements better? That's the context that people responded most often. And when you set up that kind of context, you see the kind of results, or you will see the kind of results when people assume that they're helping you as opposed to being asked just to endorse you. A general finding related to language also, all of the participant groups commented on the language of the actions. Sometimes they said that the terminology was unfamiliar or it was jargon to them. They didn't understand at times what some of these actions were meaning. Or at times they said they were so broadly written that they didn't understand enough to make a good judgment about them. And so, in terms of the audience, across all stakeholder groups, the participants questioned what this particular version of the plan, who it was written for. They questioned whether or not this is the plan that they're responding to, this is the plan for staff, and that had to do with the language itself. That had to do with the language. Is this a high-level communications document for the public, or is this something, an internal blueprint that's sufficient to guide staff's actions? And so that played out with the language that they were concerned about. So what was the most frequent feedback from employees and community members by each goal area? The first goal area was student success. And here's some of the things that we found, and we grouped these instead of staff. There were some statements that confirmed that we were on the right track and we were going to get out of it what we intended to get out, probably without a lot of revision. We call those confirmations. Some staff said that these activities or the actions under student success could improve curriculum, instruction, and the general program in the division. Now, when they were also given an opportunity to say what else and how to make it better, their cautions were the availability of the resources to support these actions, the impact that it could have on staff time and workload, and the need for adjusting the curriculum and the program itself. Do we want to make a lot of adjustments in our curriculum and programming? Be aware that what you're saying is going to cost you that. If you look under the community, some very similar ideas, same kind of confirmation. It could improve the work of the division in certain areas, but the cautions were clarity of some of the actions. Again, the language not understanding, and adjustments to the curriculum and programming. Be aware that that's what you're involved with if you institute these actions. In the next area, care and culture, the confirmation from employees that these actions really could improve student and staff well-being. The community felt the same way. But there were also cautions from employees. They thought these actions in this category were insufficient to support student and staff well-being. So some of them thought it was a confirmation, others thought it should be a caution. They also cautioned about the professional development demands. If you want to do these kind of things, people don't know how to do all of these, and so it's going to require professional development. It's also going to require, again, some adjustments to the curriculum and programming. And then lastly, the concern about, even with staff, the clarity of the language itself. Under community, very similar kind of statements. Under cautions, many people thought it was insufficient to sufficiently support students and staff well-being, and community actions to various stakeholders, communicating to the actions to various stakeholders. They thought you needed to be very cautious about how you communicate some of these actions. Now, Michelle is going to talk about the other three goal areas.
2 goal areas. Sorry.
2 goal areas, sorry.
And if we could just try and really briefly summarize, because I know there's summary findings we can touch on, okay. And then with 12 board members, I know we can go a little more in depth.
Okay. In terms of the area of premier workforce, again, we see the similar pattern of yes and. We had a percentage of our employees. Their comments indicated that the actions in this area could improve FCPS's ability to attract and retain highly qualified staff and create stability in staffing in our schools. And that's also confirmed by the community and parents as well. In terms of the and areas, the cautions, employees said that the actions as currently written were often not specific or innovative or sufficient enough to achieve the overarching strategies in this area. There were some cautions around impacts on hiring, staffing, and retention, as well as impacts on staff morale and workload. The community had a similar caution around the actions not being specific or innovative or sufficient enough to achieve the overarching strategies, and shared a similar caution around the impacts on hiring, staffing, and retention. The last area is resource stewardship. The yes part of the responses were that employees thought this could improve the accountability and transparency with the community, Board of Supervisors. Their cautions in this area was really around that overarching goal, around jargon or specificity. They said that many of the actions were not clear or specific enough really to provide comment. Community also thought that there was some value in the actions. They said this could improve parent and community engagement. And they also concurred that there was a lot of terminology that they were not familiar with or how things would play out. The last set of cautions For the employees, there were some cautions around how this would impact budgeting and resources at the school or office level. They had some concerns around accountability and transparency. How would things be measured, and what would be the impact on them as individuals, and therefore having some concerns about the impact of the actions on hiring, staffing, and retention, and again, morale and workload. The community's additional area of caution was really around the budgeting and resources, as the employees had shared.
Okay, I'm going to make the summary as brief a summary as possible here. As you can see, a minority of the comments confirm what the actions, as they're currently stating, might improve. Let me look at this list. And then the next slide summarizes, we've already made these points, but a majority of the comments offered cautions in these areas. And again, we've already covered these for you. Okay.
It's important to note as well that the information that the community and our staff reviewed is very, very different than the information that we've most recently worked on at our last retreat. So we've made many of these changes that were highlighted. Our participants were looking at a plan that was perhaps 2 versions ago, if not 3 versions ago. So we've made many of those changes around the language. I know that we've all worked very diligently as staff, along with the board, to make it much more user-friendly. And so as we continue to move through this process, we will have a product for you on June 8th that should be as clear to the public as possible and address some of these issues that were noted in the focus groups.
If I might add a couple of little things very quickly, I just think it's very important to remind those folks who may be listening, over 30,000 stakeholders participated in the initial construct of our strategic plan. This was just kind of a final kind of getting a check from a variety of stakeholders about where we are. I think, as was pointed out, jargon, we've already made some changes around that. Executive functioning was one of them, for an example, that they did not know what that was. So we understood that. So we've gone back and we've added language that it makes it more clear. They also did not have the availability of the phasing of some of this work, which I think could have contributed to a concern over workload, resources, which I think is very obvious if you just look at it without the phasing consideration for that. So I think some of the feedback has been helpful and constructive in terms of the way that the work that we've been progressing with. Thank you.
Great. I want to thank you all for being as succinct as you were and kind of briefly presenting that, so even the public has a sense of what the board's looking at. And so at this point, Ms. Reed and I want to open it up to board member questions. And first one is Ms. Evans.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the report, and particularly I think it was valuable to go back to the public and particularly the parents in the community. The feedback, I did read through all of it, and the fact that some people just didn't understand what we were trying to say, I think that's valuable feedback, so we can go back and make sure that we're saying what we mean. So I'm glad we did that. I did send several questions, and I don't know if you don't need to go through all the nitty-gritty ones, of course, but I thought I would ask a couple of the major ones that I had sent you. And I guess the key one really is what we think is going to happen when we go with to the residual OE metrics and the residual student achievement goal metrics. How are we going to handle those?
So I know that, Dr. Garza.
No, I was just going to say we prepared the crosswalk you all had asked for at the last retreat, which I think was very appropriate, and that was adding the student achievement goals to see what else is falling out.
Right.
And so what our intent would be in the next iteration that you'll see in terms of metrics, we'll show those items that have fallen out. And anything else that may need to be reflected now in the metrics, we would go back and add in. And you would have an opportunity at that next meeting we have to also say if there's a metric we haven't folded in.
So of those
We
that
haven't
fall-
done that for today's work, but we will have that for you on June 8th.
Okay, so for anything that falls out, we won't have a regular report on that. As I said in my note, there were some things that I would very much like to continue to see. Now, whether that comes because I just asked for it, it's being prepared, but it's not part of an official report. That's what I'm trying to parse through. Will it just not be? Will it not be reported to us officially, but available to us? We had talked about a bifurcated system.
I think there's two answers to that question. Number one, we're going to go back and we're adding in those that kind of were I think, critical that needed to be added back into the metrics that were represented in the student achievement goals.
Okay.
But you also would also have an opportunity to tell us, well, you still didn't have this one. That one does need to go into the plan as a metric.
Okay.
And you would still have an opportunity to tell us that on June the 8th.
Okay.
But, and those things that would be clearly reflected in the plan, aligned to a goal, will be reported out. But that doesn't mean that if there's one or two things that maybe individual board members had a keen interest in that did not finally make it to the plan when we get this done, it doesn't mean we can't report out to you on those things. If you have, just like you do on an ordinary basis, if there's something that you're interested in or want to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can respond to those, but I think to the largest extent, we need to make sure the metrics are reflective of what we think this board would want to see to measure progress.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that reassurance because there are some things that maybe only a few of us want to see and doesn't have to be, excuse me, part of the larger report. I think you're continuing to work on the desired outcomes and actions from the retreat, and I had asked to see that, but I think because of the concern about some of the jargon and all of that, you're still working on that. Is that correct? So we'll see that before June 8th? Okay, great.
The purpose of the June 8th meeting.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. We now have Ms. Strauss, followed by Ms. Hines.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the nuanced information that you gave us. I think it's very, very important. And I am pleased to hear that you've already gone back and you're working on the issue of clarity of terms in any profession, education as well. There's always terms that we understand that other people don't. So I am pleased to hear that. And the phasing issue, in other words, what adjustments are already being made to make sure that we are as clear as possible. And I guess when we see the final piece, it will be important to be able to show what our aspirational goals that we have and the acknowledgement of phasing and what it's going to take, and that when we set a direction, a broad, high-level direction for the school system, it takes time, it's going to take resources, and this isn't something that is accomplished overnight, and clearly the community needs to understand that. So I'll be interested in seeing that. And the issue of the metrics, I really appreciated how you all and the rest of the report have shown what metrics will underpin this, at least as we are talking now, what will be needed to underpin this for the school board, and then what is for the administration for the carrying out of this. I think this is, I know we've talked about this before, I think this is a very important understanding. And we certainly don't want to produce data just to produce data. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. We really don't want to do that. And as we know that our staff support is thin for all of these things, we want to be strategic in the kind of reports that we require and how we use those reports effectively so that we are not just simply turning out reports. And I think it's also important that however everything is finally moved forward in terms of data analysis, reports, what have you, that it's easy to find on the website, because I know we've talked about that. We want to be as transparent as possible, and we want things to be able, that we can find it easily, that staff can find stuff easily, and that the public can find it easily. The other piece, I know, where there's the cross between this kind of reporting and the financial reporting, we know that the program budget, which is actually a financial statement, and that people understand what it can or cannot do and how this is put together, because I think that there is not always a clarity of understanding of how all of this fits together. So anyway, thank you all very much. Really appreciate the updates, and we'll look forward to our next very long meeting as we try to bring this all together. So good work. Thank you very much.
Ms. Hines?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you as well. This is a huge challenge. I mean, it's a big work, big document, and we have such an enormous constituency here, right, that we have to try to reach out to. And just kind of getting people's pulse, I think, is difficult to do, but I'm glad that we took the opportunity to do it. Thank you. The only question I had, and I just wanted to make sure, I think it was slide 13 where the workforce concerns of staff. I just feel like that's a particularly important area where I'm going to want to be looking through, the actual comments and seeing what people had to say. And so I just for everybody's sake, that is in Appendix H, right, is where we get the actual comments from people. Okay. Okay, but I mean, we actually have, I'm looking at Appendix H, but does it actually also have, it looks like quotes, get out of comfort zone and make it very uncomfortable, that sort of thing. Those are actual things people said, right? Okay, all right.
Let me just clarify that to make sure we're all on the same page. We have thousands of comments. We took the comments and tried to group them into themes. And so that's what's in the appendix. And to help you understand what that means, we often had some quotes, but there's a whole separate database that we use of all the comments. So what's in the appendix is not all the comments, but the themes with some exemplaries.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right, we now have Mr. Velkoff.
That was quick. I guess I'd like to, first of all, toss out, for everyone's benefit, what I think this is doing, and maybe you can correct me offline. But I see the purpose of this is to really identify, we're not really trying to focus on the work that's day-to-day that we always have to do, which is ongoing, right? We're trying to focus on the things that are new and different, that are driven by concerns that have fallen into 4 categories. So I just want to make sure that, my understanding of that is correct. To that end, then, to the point about the OEs and the mapping and all of that, I certainly hope that this is driving us to produce fewer reports that the staff feels that they need to provide to the school board. It doesn't really do any of us any good for us to be producing reports on things that honestly aren't helping us make any decisions. It's too much work for all of you folks and of little benefit to us. So I see the strategic achievement goals and operational expectations. That's really covering sort of the comprehensive work of the school system, and I think what the strategic plan, again, is trying to focus on is what are the things that are out of the ordinary where we need increased focus. Okay, so just as a point of clarity, I wanted to say that. I think something that perhaps could be made a little more prominent is the prioritization of actions. And it's not quite, I think it's not quite the same thing as the timeline. While the timeline, certainly you want to address the highest priority things first, there might be some high priority things that actually can't get going until later. So if there's a way to kind of express priorities and some of the nuance with respect to timeline, that would be helpful. I have just 2 more, I'm sorry, it is 3 more things. I was very concerned that principals were, they were speechless in terms of offering some positives about a couple of aspects of the plan. And I know that the point of this was to get feedback, but if we don't have our leaders on board, that's a huge issue. So, and I understand that it's gone through iterations, but I just wanted to make note of that. Personally, I think the audience focus is really ultimately for the staff, because this is an action plan of what the staff is going to do. Again, it's driven by things that have been identified from the community, but the people who have to make this happen are the staff. And then finally, I'm just going to say that I really think that, and I'm trying to step back up to the highest level for what I think are the priorities of these 4 categories. And I really hope that this is going to drive us to more authentic assessments, increased resources, both financial and capital, and improved morale.
Any other board members have any questions or comments? Mr. Annette Koufax.
Thank you, and thank you all for presenting this to us today. I'm going to echo some of what Ted said, but I just want to state it up front. I do think in the end, this is going to be the right thing for us, and I understand concerns. We've struggled internally with this. What is a strategic plan? How do we do it? And sometimes this may be the first time for some of our educators, our principals, seeing something like this, because it's not something. It's more like a business's marketing communications tool, and oftentimes it's not one of those things that their career has given them the opportunity to delve into. I think one of the concerns, again, was a bit concerned about the principal's take, and I was also concerned about the 2 things that Mr. Valkov mentioned about the prioritization of our actions, how we can do that. I think that will come, and I think, where we are at this stage, I feel confident that we're okay. The one thing that just kind of took me by surprise, I guess, in a way, not surprise, but, the ask, is it an internal blueprint or is it a communication device? I think we've been trying to make it both. We have been trying to make it both. And in the end, it is going to be a working document for staff and then the school board to oversee. At this point in the development, we need to make it as community-friendly as we can so people can understand, and they understand what our priorities are. But I think in the end, we have to decide what that's going to be. I think a lot of the questions and a lot of the things that said, they weren't familiar with the jargon, they weren't familiar with this, that gets to the point that in the end, it's going to be a staff-led document. And not everybody in the community has the edu-speak that we've all, and all the knowledge that we've gained just by being board members. So I just want to just wanted to say that as a general comment and consideration. And I think some of these things, as we go forward, will flesh themselves out and we'll be in a better place.
Koufax? Okay. We next have up Ms. Schultz.
So I think that was an interesting phrase that the chairman used, is edu-speaks. So at a big takeaway, because we delved right into not summary findings, but kind of individual findings on each one of these sections. But I would say that the big takeaway for me is that their takeaway appears to be that the language is, somewhat, whether it's muddled or so specific to an action of the board that it is that there is a distance between what it's intending to do and whether we're communicating what it's intending to do. And that's been kind of one of my concerns all along, is, have we kind of delved into language here that kind of has a neat sound to it in some cases, but is it comprehensible to the public about what we are strategically trying to do? And so at a overarching perspective on does it make common sense, I'm not quite sure that either on the teacher, certainly the principal side, or on the community side, that answer has been received in a way that's comforting. So I know there's still work to do, But, that kind of, in a nutshell, I mean, we can go in lots of different places, but the question is, have we really communicated in a way that this language matches actionable efforts that the public and our employees can see and understand in such a way that they know where we're going? And I think that that's kind of clear from them that they're not quite sure.
Is that all, Ms. Schultz? Okay, Mr. Stork?
Thank you. I do have some concern about the number of reports and processes that are in the residual category, and I'm happy to give this process, I guess, an opportunity to work. And I recognize under our strategic governance process, we can ask for a monitoring report on really anything that we so choose, and that, I think, ultimately gives us the ability to get additional information on particular areas. So, but there are some in here that I have concerns about, and I guess I just need to go through and maybe identify those more offline and more directly. But one of the overall questions that I had that I'm not clear about is the state collects data and reports data to a number of different, they report data, or at least I guess they have data available, which is then utilized by a number of different, I'll say, web-based organizations to rate our schools and to otherwise categorize our schools. And I guess I wanted to be sure, and because I don't know that level of detail, that we have, we're not excluding from our reporting or not including, or that we are including in our reporting, I think, the most core data that the state uses to assess our schools' performance. Again, I'll use greatschools.com, and they rate our schools 1 to 10, and how you're rated depends upon, frankly, your results on certain test scores and certain measures that are reported by the state. So I don't know if you can answer that now, but at least I want to at least get the question out there and see if maybe someone could ultimately respond on that.
I would say all those metrics that we're currently accountable to, whether it's the state or federal government, will be reflected in our metrics under Goal 1. So when this is all done, and we didn't come today prepared to talk about the metrics, but we will spend a lot of time on it on June the 8th. But you will see that we've made sure that those are reflected under the Goal 1.
So in essence, just to paraphrase what you're saying, is that anything that's reported to the state will be reported to the board in a format that we would be able to access it and understand it and at least be ahead of at least whatever the state might offer to other reporting organizations.
So for an example, right now you all are receiving the, I just went blank. It's the annual student progress report measure. It's the annual, it's the student around the student achievement goals. That full report on student achievement, that was essentially that will continue, but it will be become the Goal 1 report, right? Which is the student success. But we can talk more fully about this. We want to make sure it is what you all want it to be, and we still have an opportunity to make sure any of the metrics that we may have not contemplated are reflected in the plan on June the 8th.
And just in general, I appreciate the process that we've gone through. It has been, I think, elongated, and I think we've gotten some valuable feedback, although I recognize that where we are now isn't where we were a couple months ago when most of the data was being collected. So look forward to the next step of this process. Thank you.
Is that all, Mr. Stork? All right. Thank you. Now we have Ms. Smith.
Thank you. You can see how it's hard for the comments to focus on the areas we really wanted people to provide feedback on, probably because it's not their comfort zone measuring those things. But the one piece of feedback that does resonate with me and is the concern is the principles with it being too much. And I know you've talked about timelines and all that, and so that's my one concern, that we have enough time on the 8th to get through this and we're sure of where the document is and it's focused like we want it to be, because then if it's new business the 25th, just that timing and for us to do that. So that's my one concern with this, but I appreciate all the work you guys have done.
Okay. Ms. Reed?
First, thank you to staff for putting this together. It's very helpful. I do have a number of comments. I'll try to be brief. Can you clarify for us, first of all, specifically what materials the focus group participants had in front of them to review? You talk about actions, but I'm not sure that we all understand what it is that they looked at in particular.
You may need to help me with this one also. Some of the folks got some information in advance because it was available, but regardless of whether they got it or not, when they arrived, we gave them a list of the ECRA value statements. I think there were some
They refer to them as the major
17
findings.
17 statements on a sheet. Here's what the community said earlier that they valued. And then we also gave them, each participant, all of the actions grouped by each one of the goal areas. And am I missing anything? Is it?
Okay, and where can I find that here if I want? That's not part of your presentation. Is it in an appendix or something that actually shows the specific materials that they looked at?
They were simply given the strategic plan that we used at that time. So the same copies of the plan that we were using as a board at our retreats, they were given that same copy of the strategic plan.
Okay. Well, that I think as a next step, that would be something. It starts to get confusing who's looking at what materials when, and I think when we talk about strategic plan, it's important that we just keep, I think, consistent what materials we're talking about. Because there's a number of attachments here, and I myself am confused when I see the actions, which I don't see, but reference to actions, and then I see metrics, and so I'm really now very confused about what people looked at, what is the strategic plan. That's my first comment. So if we can clarify that for people, and it may be as simple as just putting an attachment out there that references the things that you've described. But I want to go on. You talked about the representation from the community and employee groups. Did you have any people that represented the business community at all? Did we get their input yet?
We did not target specific groups. So we did a random selection process initially, and then whoever from the community chose to come, we accepted their participation. We did not ask for their affiliation in any way, and so I can't really tell you who they represented, but we did not target specific groups.
Okay. That's worrisome to me, actually. And so to follow up with that, how about, I know that you mentioned employee groups and employees. The three employee associations that we always do business with, were they all asked to participate? FEA, FCFT, and AFPE?
What I can add to that is that we did, in looking at the group of employees that we invited to the focus groups, that we would have gotten representation from those groups within that process. And we are also going to offer them an additional look at the strategic plan before we bring it to the board on the 8th of June. So our three groups will have an opportunity to weigh in on that final copy before we bring it to the board.
So I didn't understand you. Were they included or no?
So,
you're saying you're going to include them in the next step?
We did not directly include them in the last one in terms of saying that we would like you to select individuals to be a part of the process. But because we did use a blind process to choose those individuals as part of the plan, we didn't want to have staff select principals to be part of the plan, so we didn't want to have that same piece for teachers. But we will be providing that last look before we bring it back to the board on the 8th.
And I think it's important for clarity purposes. I don't want people to assume this has been the only opportunity for the community or stakeholders or employees to weigh in. Remember, we had this entire process of 30,000 people. We also had, before, we've had 8 to 10 different community focus groups, and many of our teacher organizations, employee groups were well represented in that process. This was just a final one other opportunity for our stakeholders to weigh in. So this wasn't the only time that employee groups have been able to have a say in this process. And so it's important.
I understand that. I feel that this is an evolving process, and we need to make sure that we're keeping all of our community members and partners, just as I said earlier, kind of on the same sheet of music. That's all. That was my fear, is just we don't want any surprises or somebody feel like they're not participating. What are the plans to specifically address the number of cautions that were identified by these groups? Are you working, I mean, it was alluded to, but are you working on those items in particular?
Well, it's ensuring as we work to develop the remainder of the plan that we, pay attention and pay heed to those cautions. Are we considering workload issues as we think about moving forward? And I think that as we look at the phasing, we're certainly considering those workload issues for staff. Are we considering issues around language? Most definitely. So as we look at the major areas, the major themes, we're ensuring that we're doing that as staff, and would also then encourage the board as we look at that final copy on the 8th to keep some of those things in the forefront.
Thank you. I still feel at this point, when I look at that timeline, that this June 8th date might be ambitious. That maybe, to Mrs. Smith's point, that maybe that might be an interim type of a step, because, again, I haven't seen the whole document in one place myself. I've seen pieces, and I don't know what members of the public think, but it seems to me that when you talk about addressing these number of challenges, those are significant issues that people have raised. And so there'll be brand new materials that we've never seen before. And I think, I would ask my colleagues this question, how would you feel about a process where we have an interim, for the first time seeing the document on June 8th, and maybe then we can provide our input when we see this document for the first time. But then I think we should go back out to everybody, not including or excluding any particular group, but then to see the whole document together, and then answering the question about resources and what makes it strategic. Where are the decision points? Or if this document doesn't reflect strategic priorities, when will we do that? Because in my view, right now, it's a great listing of all kinds of things, but again, it's not strategic and it's not a plan. And I know I'm now going beyond the topic, and I'm going to bring it right back to the timeline, and that's why I'm focusing on that right now. This is not a strategic plan discussion, but my point is, for my colleagues, and this is my proposal, that June 8th be the first draft that is presented to the board, and then you get comments from the board, and then at that point we go back out to the community. I just feel like there's no need to rush it. This has to be done right, and we need people to feel like they're all part of the process, particularly the business community. My goodness, they certainly have a vested interest in our strategic plans. So I guess I'll stop there, but I just wonder if anyone has any comments or reaction to what I've said.
Okay, well, I guess I'm trying to figure out the process because I haven't spoken, you'd like to speak, and Ms. Smith is a go-back. So I don't know if you want to speak before me or...
Go ahead, and then we'll go back after.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's timely that I came right behind Ms. Reed because I do have concerns, and I agree with Ms. Smith on the timeline then on where we're at. I guess specifically, I found the list of cautions giving me pause. And, I do understand the purpose that this was just an update, but I think Ms. Reed asked some really important questions, which is based on the cautions, then what does that, tell us from Dr. Garza's perspective or yours, Mr. Smith, and the leadership team on is June 8th reasonable given the cautions that in a cumulative way, to me, signal that we're not there yet. And I also do think that while it's great that you guys did these focus groups and they had the random sample, I actually, when I think of shaping a document like this, I almost would prefer the random sampling that happens in the beginning to draw in community input on what we're looking for, what they, again, going back to what ECRA did, what is a value in the community for our strategic focus. But then once we started getting this framework, I actually think the focus groups of key stakeholders would have been maybe more beneficial than the way we went with this. So Ms. Reed mentioning, did we have the business community? Did we have our 3 teachers associations? Did we have some of our key, parent organizations who really do follow the educational system in Fairfax and know where we are and where we'd like to go? So for me, this information today is almost like a first blush, but I haven't really heard, maybe Dr. Garza, you can speak to it, but what I'm seeing in front of me actually makes me more nervous about where we are in the process in terms of, because I think the cautions they brought forward were substantive and reasonable, and I just want to make sure that, because we have worked on this a long time, and I know everybody feels that way, but sometimes you might have to work on it because we tried attacking it in one direction, and I don't think we necessarily are getting where we need to be. So then the question is maybe reevaluating, how do we get back toward this overall goal, which is a strategic plan. But I just feel like the feedback we got today sends up more red flags than comfort that we're actually making that forward progress. I almost feel like it's putting us in a, hey, red flag, stop, we better assess this. And the process we've got going right now, is that actually going to deliver us in the end where we need to be? And I haven't really heard anyone really speak to that, and I think that's what Ms. Reed was kind of asking board members to say, is looking at that list of cautions, are people comfortable, or do we think that we need to help provide guidance to Dr. Garza about what it's signaling to us?
Earlier on, you said you'd like for me to respond. Now you said you wanted your board members to respond, so I don't want to weigh in unless you want me to here.
Yeah. Oh, I'm kind of just letting you know, we'll let the board members go, but if, based on what I was asking, if you want to think about that, you don't need to speak to it now. You go ahead.
Let me just say this. The timeline for the development of the strategic plan has been modified a couple of times. And so we are responding to where you all are and your level of comfort at that particular juncture. It would be my recommendation to you all to wait until June 5th, see where we are, and then if you're not comfortable with where we are at that particular juncture, we can always modify. We're hearing your feedback. We certainly appreciate that. We are taking, and have been for some time, the feedback from these focus groups and incorporating that in the iterations of the plan. Now, there have been draft copies, numerous draft copies that have been provided to the board, and we've had a number of different retreats on those, so it's not like there's a lot of new stuff out there. We are trying to collapse it into one document, so you have all the background information and all that in one place. So I certainly, and you'll get that for June 5th. But my all the concerns I think are certainly, they've been well taken, and certainly. But my recommendation to you all will be wait until June 5th and then determine kind of where we are. And if you all want to modify the plan, June 8th. If you want to modify the timeline at that point, we certainly could do so.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Garza. Ms. Koufax, followed by Ms. Smith, followed by Mr. Velkoff.
I just wanted to go over the schedule on June 8th so you know how much time we do have. We have a significant amount of time. We have 2 agenda items, and even with lunch built in, we will begin at 2 talking about the strategic plan, and we can go 4 hours, 5 hours, however long you want to go. What I would like to say to the board members, and one thing I would like to ask of staff, I think we need a little bit of a review because this process has been so elongated. I would like to get a review of the input that we did have. What community, from the very beginning, from where we started, from when we worked with Hank, I think we need a comprehensive overview of when the community looked at it, when the board looked at it, how Portrait of a Graduate was wrapped around it, all of those things, because even for us, the people that are helping craft it, because the process has been so long, I think we're losing track of what we did and where we are. So I think that's very important for us to have at that prior to that June 8th session.
Prior to? Oh,
Prior to.
We'll record that as a next step.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I would ask my colleagues, and what I'll do probably is look at the schedule. So maybe by next chairman's, like, what other types of things are you not, I mean, let's be real, are we not remembering, or do we need clarity on? And to make sure that staff will have answers to those questions at the prior to the June 8th meeting, and I'll work with Dr. Garza to make certain, and Mr. Smith to make certain that we have it in sufficient time for us to review it and synthesize it, so we're really, really prepared when we come here June 8th. And again, as Dr. Garza said, I think it is, I caution about putting it out too much further and continuing to go out, and I'm always on board for additional community feedback or additional input, and we can come to that term. But I do think if we look and see where we are, I think we've done a good job, and we will continue to have some meetings on this as well. But please get back to me on what you think parts are missing, so we can communicate that and we can see where we are on June 8th.
Great, thank you, Ms. Koufax. Ms. Smith?
I guess I need to explain what I was talking about when I was talking about time frame and enough time. I do think we're at the point now, this is sitting with us to do the work. I don't visualize us taking it out to the community again. I think we've gotten community feedback, and I think we've seen from the responses we got the difficulty for the community to provide feedback on some of these issues because it's not in part of the comfort zone. I think the most important community feedback we got was where are the results, what the community wants the school system to look like, and that was the most valuable feedback. My concern when I talked about the time frame is if the board does have any serious concerns on the 8th, that there's enough time for things to be worked through before new business on the 25th. But I don't look at us lengthening this process and doing more community engagement, more pieces like that. I think we're at the point we've gotten that feedback and we need to move ahead. Thank you.
Okay, we now have Mr. Velkoff, followed by Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Strauss.
So I just want to say we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, and we really need to move forward on this timeline. Let's remember how this is going to work. We're going to get a quarterly report on the progress, and each quarter we're also going to have an opportunity to alter or revise the plan. It's not like it's going to be fixed in stone and can't change. So I see no value in extending the timeline of the process.
Okay, Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Strauss.
I think I'm somewhere both close to Kathy and Patty, actually. I think it's going to be important for us to see the complete document from beginning to end. You know, one of the things that I had asked for was a redlined copy, you know, of changes since our April 11th retreat, because I think it's not just a matter of being reminded, it's a matter of seeing the complete document. So I would hope that we would get that as far in advance of the June 8th meeting so that we could all read it and absorb it, because there's a lot here. And then I think if we come in on June 8th and have, maybe we'll have no questions, I doubt that, but if we have significant numbers, then we may need to rethink it. But it may be that we can resolve all of that if we have it in enough time ahead of time to say, okay, we now have, you know, a dozen questions, we'll answer them, and then we can put them on as new business. If not, we may need to push it a bit. But, you know, I think it's important that we see the whole thing as a package.
Great, thanks, Ms. Evans. Ms. Strauss.
Okay, I agree with everything everybody has said so far, and I think June 8th, it's very important that we see how this all comes together. Yes, we can always rearrange the timeline if we need to. However, I think it's very important that we push ourselves to get the work done as school board members on that June 8th day, because you remember our aspirational goals and really, you know, the larger ideas that we are that I think we agree on and what we think our kids need to know and be able to do to be successful in their future, that has a lot of impact on what we know is going to be a very difficult budget year and maybe budget years to come. And if we think we are really going to back off on what we think our kids need to know and be able to do, I think it'd be kind of sad. So we do have heavy lifting as a board on June 8th, and we need to stick to that and really work hard for that. But I think it's important that we attempt to finish our work and to be able to tie a lot of these goals together as we try to figure out how we're going to fund this. And if we really believe in the Portrait of the Graduate, this is our opportunity to try to begin to roll this out. And it's going to be phased and it's going to be heavy lifting. But I think we need to push ourselves. We need to be transparent to the public. I think, all this is fair comment. But I think we're going to have to work very hard on June 8th and just be ready to work hard. So thanks.
All right, so my comments as we close this part of the work session is that I do understand what Ms. Strauss and Ms. Smith and others have already pointed out. However, I don't think it can be lost by the fact that we did these focus groups, and what we heard from our own employees, not simply just the community, is that the jargon and the intensity of action that this strategic plan is outlining is of concern. And so while I hear that we'll try to do this on June 8th, but if we brought out to them what we thought was our best work, and their feedback was, this looks daunting and it's actually hard to discern, then we're going to need to do a really tremendous job through KIT messages and communication to say, on June 8th, the board's looking at this document that Dr. Garza and her team has revised based on community input. And from that point forward, we still want those key stakeholders, the ones who participate in the focus group, our Portrait of a Graduate group, our teacher-employee groups, our principals, everyone who's been to date. We want to drive home the message. Here's the next refinement. The board is really trying to be timely with this, but your continued input to the board is critical. And so I'd like to have as a next step that we really look at a communications timeline on how we're communicating and getting people to really pay attention. If it's on board docs, it means they can email and tell us their input. And at minimum, I'd like to see that as a key part of this. I am worried that if we don't get the employee as well as the community looking at this next revision, we could proceed forward, but when we brought it to them just now, we didn't realize what their reaction and response would be. So that's my ask on the next steps. And I will say I thought one of the best suggestions we got, Dr. Garza, and I will ask you to maybe see what you think about this, but that Portrait of a Graduate task force ended up being a really great comprehensive group of stakeholders. And I'd like to actually see before June 8th, or again through the communications, how we could get this also in front of them. It's voluntary, obviously, that they can reply back to us, but I just think sending this draft to them that we're going to be looking at on the 8th, whether it's after you take our comments on the 8th, but something that really pushes it out to, like the teacher groups, like this Portrait of Graduate group, before the board finds itself voting on July 9th. I think that's how we could get some really good feedback on this plan as it's being finalized. Oh, and Ms. Reed has one more comment before we wrap it up, but I'm pleased to say we're only 10 minutes behind and we started 5 minutes.
So I agree with what Ms. McLaughlin just said, so I won't repeat that. But I very much want to follow up on Ms. Strauss and getting us back to the 10,000-foot level. It is my hope that the materials that staff present will ultimately help us and tee up the very difficult budget deliberations that we'll be having. So that I do think that there must be a link there because we're going to be going out and having some very difficult discussions about whether we do this or we don't do that. And this document can be very, very helpful, right? So I would ask staff to kind of think about that as kind of one of the end uses of the document, is to help both the board, the employees, and the members of the public help us with the budget decisions, but also envisioning kind of the new school system that we're building.
And so for next steps,
And before we end, I just need to commend Dr. Sockwell and his staff. This was a major undertaking when we think about the thousands of comments that they had to individually code in order to provide the documents today. And so I would just like to thank them publicly for the work.
Thank you very much.
all right, for our next steps, we have request for staff to provide information on the strategic plan materials that were provided to the various focus groups. And the second next step is to request to provide, prior to the June 8 work session, all the input on the strategic plan that has been collected by staff from all stakeholders from the beginning of the process.
I think that what was meant there is kind of a reiteration of the entire process, including various steps along the way, how stakeholders had input. I think it was just an overall remind us of the timeline and the activity, the work that's been done to this date. I think that was what the board member had requested.
Well, and I had requested that I think we do need to have some sort of communications plan on how we're going to be making the public aware that the board's looking at this June 8th. We're then having it as new business on the 25th, and then we're having the vote on July 9th, so that we can be inviting all stakeholders to be aware this is where it's coming. We're inviting them to also provide input to us, and whether the board decides at the June 8th work session, that's where we could also have that conversation. But I want people to be thinking about this, that moving forward without having some way that the board has been intentional with its communication outreach to the public is of concern for me.
Okay, ready?
Ms. Evans, you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that too. And again, going back to we need to see the final full package. Do you have an estimate? Maybe this is a hard question to answer at this point. When you think that final package can be to us? I mean, is it going to be right before the June 8th work session, or can we see it sooner than that? I think the sooner we can get it, the better for us and for the public.
We understand that. I heard that reiterated, I think, strongly. I think it's appropriate because there is a lot of material that you'll need to go through once again. Before I give you a specific date, let me visit with the team to see when we can have it done. Because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Sure.
But the point's well taken. Let us look at it, and by this week's superintendent update, let us be able to put that in the update as to when you'll receive it.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That would be great. And
Okay.
I think when that happens, picking up on what Megan was talking about, I think that's the point at which we can then put out a communications to the community and say, here it is, here's, it's out here in the public, whether it's, it's on board docs, here's the link to it, and here's how you can weigh in on it. I don't think we need to do anything more than that, but that would be another opportunity for the community to say, okay, the whole package has now been posted. If I want to write to my board member, if I want to write to the superintendent, I have an opportunity to do it.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Evans and Dr. Garza. I appreciate that. I think that's very reasonable to get with staff and then figure out what we can work with. I told Ms. Reed I think we can roll right into the second work session and make sure we stay on time. So to staff and Mr. Smith, thank you again for participating in the work session today. And I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Reed, who's going to...
Excuse me. I think we need to pause for the tape, just a 2-minute pause. That's what we, for the video, that's what we have to do.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well then, I guess we'll give you a 2-minute break to stand up, stretch your legs, and be ready to go.
And in the meantime, if we can call Dr.